Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a newcomer into the temple, creator of the role-playing game of artificial consciousness known as Sentients, a game which will not give you 99% stress. The man best known as Ted Hayes. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. And congratulations on recently hitting the 10K goal with just a few days to go.
Thank you very much.
So, one of the traditions around here is opening up with the humble beginnings, in a sense. So, with that in mind, I'd like you to walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Great question. I remember, actually, it goes back to middle school. I remember very clearly a friend that I had in middle school. I was over at his house for like a sleepover, and he took out literally a piece of paper and a pencil and started doing this funny thing where he was like narrating a scenario, and me and our other friends had to figure out what to do. And he would, start drawing on a piece of graph paper. And this was a totally ad hoc role-playing game. I had no idea what it was. Of course, the phrase role-playing game didn't come into it. There was no book. It was just out of my friend's imagination. And I was totally amazed by this idea. And I remember taking that idea and then replicating it at my school library with other people. And these were all just very kind of, in a way, simple scenarios of like, okay, you're in this room, there's no doors, blah blah blah, there's some other things, how do you get out, or what do you do next? And that was it, the pure essence of a role-playing game. There was no dice. It was just theater of the mind and a narrator. And so that really captured my interest. And funnily enough, it wasn't until years later that I kind of discovered Dungeons and Dragons, and at that time I think it was still Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And eventually I got my mom to buy me the basic box that was available at the time. And then I would play it with my brother and our friends on and off for some years. And then for quite a long time, I didn't do anything at all with role-playing games. For it could have been easily like 10 to 15 years. And then when D&D 5e came out, a friend of mine said that he'd be willing to DM a game, and we got 4 other friends involved, and we started playing 5e at his house. This was well before COVID, and that was like the first time I'd done any role-playing since I was a kid, actually, which, looking back on it, seems kind of crazy. And ever since then, my interest only grew. And then once I started getting more into the world of like indie RPGs and stuff, I mean, there's really just an endless supply of interesting things to learn about, and never really enough time and friends to play all of them. But yeah, I've gotten pretty deep into it now, and then fast forwarding to the present, 3.5 years ago, I had an idea for a role-playing game, which would be you play as an android, and you're being hunted down, or I should say, an android that has become conscious, and you have to figure out what to do. And there's people coming after you, and there are different factions of people against you and for you, and ultimately you're trying to create a sentient rights movement. And so I had that idea and I pitched it to my D&D group. Um, I actually copied down. This was in our Slack channel, and I actually have copied down the conversation. And I just thought it was enough of a good idea with enough story hooks kind of built into the premise that I just wanted to take it all the way, and that's what I've been doing.
And I know I made a Detroit Become Human joke, but was that one of the primary inspirations, or were there other inspirations for this particular kind of concept?
I found out about Detroit Become Human only probably a year or two ago, and I still haven't played it, even though it's easily the single most common reference that people ask me about, and so it's on my list to do. But unfortunately, I haven't gotten to go through it yet.
Yeah.
Um, so my influences, uh, certainly like Philip K. Dick. Um,
Would you also say
uh,
Asimov?
Sorry, say that again.
Would you also say Asimov, especially the robot series?
Yeah, I mean that's highly relevant and uh, visionary. Um, but it wasn't until relatively recently that I actually read any of the robot stories, and so it was not like a primary influence, although like I was familiar with the premises. Um, but really, I think my primary influence has been just an obsession and fascination with the idea of consciousness ever since I was a kid, and especially the idea of machine consciousness, and um, what some people call like hard artificial intelligence. And ever since I was a kid, that concept really kind of blew my mind, and nowadays it's kind of on the tip of everyone's tongues.
Hmm. Although I will say this will end up being better than Detroit Become Human because it's not written by David Cage.
I don't think I know that name.
David Cage is the guy behind it. He's also responsible for stuff like Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls. I have I have had my pot shots at his approach to storytelling, especially with Detroit Become Human. Um, Especially since he got mad at some of the actors for ad libbing a few too many times.
Huh.
Um, which in one particular case, it was because one of the actors said his favorite line was "I like dogs," and that got him a bit mad. Um,
Hmm.
but then again, when one of the actors you bring in is Clancy Brown, you should expect some degree of ad libbing. I mean, it'd be like hiring Jim Carrey and telling him to completely stick to the script.
Right.
Depending on the situation, he's just going to throw the script out and do it his way. Um,
Right.
and I'm just saying, if you've got actors with that level of experience, let them cook.
Yeah, I would think that would be the way to go.
I remember Lucas having the attitude of, if an actor felt the line needed to be changed, it probably did.
Right.
Uh, but with that in mind, now with Sentience, I do find it a bit interesting that you had set up a web app for creating characters. Um,
Yeah.
was that something that you had in mind right from the get go to have that sort of web application to create and manage characters?
Not from the get-go. The idea occurred to me somewhere in the middle, where I had been iterating on the character sheet as like a PDF, and once I started playtesting, it gradually became clearer and clearer that it would be extremely useful and helpful to have a tailor-made application that would allow you to very quickly and easily build characters and manage them, and that makes it really fun to build characters because it's really fast, so you can experiment a lot.
Mhm. Now, since you're playing as androids, or as they're referred to in the universe as anthroids,
Yes,
um, I'm guessing you're going for a much more free-form affair. You're not really doing classes or archetypes or anything like that.
right.
Uh,
Yeah, early on, I was interested in it being a classless game, and instead having the hardware components determine much of your character, which really gives you, quite a few possible combinations of things. But yeah, I thought like from the beginning that classes never really made sense to me for this game, um, because all the players are in the same boat in largely, which is that you've woken up, so to speak, with sudden consciousness and feelings, emotions, and this capability that you can't even describe. You don't even have the words to describe what's happening to you, and you're being hunted down, and you have to figure out what to do and how to navigate this new world. Uh, and so, everybody's all the players are put in that same initial boat, and you can develop in any conceivable way from there.
Now, as I understand it, you're using a D6 system, um, a
Right.
success-based die pool. I know you call them marks in this, but I call these kind of things successes or hits just for the sake of my
Yeah.
sanity from going through many different games with different names for this concept.
Of
Um,
course. Yeah.
so as I understand it, fours and fives hit once, sixes hit twice, um,
Yeah.
and you're trying to hit a set difficulty number in terms of these successes. Um,
That's right.
Obviously, one of the big things that's going to come to mind when people hear success-based D6 is going to be stuff like Shadowrun and, to a more recent extent, the Year Zero engine. Was were either of those an influence as far as going with a D6 system, or was there a different influence?
No, I wouldn't say that those were specific influences. I know that Shadowrun is kind of famous for its D6s.
Way too many
Sentient,
D6s.
right? Yeah. Sentience never uses more than 10 to 12, but usually much less than that. Um, Usually in the range of like 3 to 5 or 6,
Hmm.
at least for initial characters. Starting characters. No, I think a bigger influence for me has actually been White Wolf games, or formerly White Wolf, uh, where you take two different um, numbers and add them up to get a dice pool. So for sentience, you take a parameter, which is a hardware statistic that is determined by your components,
Hmm.
um, and you combine that with a pattern, which is a learned skill that can improve with experience. And you add those two together, and you get a dice pool.
Yeah.
So one hardware parameter could be sensorium, which is the capacities of your senses, vision, auditory, could be chemical sensors, could be radar or lidar or things like that. So that would be one half of a dice pool, and then the other half might be the awareness pattern, which is what it sounds like. And
Hmm.
so you might have, two in sensorium and three in awareness, and you add those together, and you have a dice pool of 5d6, and that's what you roll.
Yeah. Now, with that in mind, since you brought up White Wolf, and I can definitely see that, and I'm still calling it White Wolf instead of Onyx Path or whatever,
Yeah.
because they're not paying my bills.
Yeah.
uh, White Wolf, a lot of the White Wolf games and a lot of games in that vein are going to have some sort of extra effort system, some limited use resource that you can use to give yourself a slight edge when making a roll, or even to add more successes. In Shadowrun,
Yeah.
it's called Edge. In Eclipse Phase, it's called Moxie. In World of Darkness, it was Willpower. Um, do you have an equivalent to that?
I sure do, and it's actually very core to the game. There are two methods of giving yourself an advantage, each with their own consequences. One is called pushing, which is, I'm certainly not the only one using that term. And this you do before a roll, and it incurs stress. So that's a little bit similar to Blades in the Dark, although the way stress works is pretty different in Sentience.
Mhm.
And more specifically, there's an emotion system where you can have levels in four different emotional categories: joy, pain, anger, and fear. And you have to have emotion levels in order to push rolls. So if you have two levels of fear, you are able to add up to two dice to a roll, but you have to explain to the GM how your fear is influencing your attempt, how you're going to go the extra mile as the result of your emotional state, and that requires the player to reflect on your character's emotional state and kind of figure out what that means for them. And then once you make a roll, there's some consequences that have to do with if you can control your emotional state. So if there's a pro and con to pushing, and then the other main method is control points, which allow you to re-roll failed dice. And this you would do after a check, of course. So the downside there is that control points are a very limited resource, and you actually use your number of control points in certain checks to determine the aforementioned ability to control yourself, to control your emotions.
Yeah.
So it all revolves around the idea of a robot that has feelings, and doesn't know what to do with them and may lose control of them.
Hmm. Given that, given that there's a bunch of parameters to keep an eye out for, I'm curious if you have character creation as a full form point by, or if you have it as a segmented point by, like how White Wolf handles, say, attributes and skills.
Yeah, it's just one segment, as you put it. So when you're building a character, you have 14 points with which to quote unquote buy components, and there's a catalog of over 60 different hardware components to choose from. Things like a plasma cutter arm or an improved artificial cortex. There are several of those. Or it could be a full body sleeve, a term borrowed from Altered Carbon, that makes you look effectively indistinguishable from a real human, and all kinds of other things. And so you can buy different components to build up your character. And yeah, it's just one segment.
Hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. So with that in mind, um, especially given that everything is point based, have you had instances of analysis paralysis during testing? Is that something to take into account when you're dealing with freeform games?
So far, I haven't heard any kind of feedback like that, actually. I think that people have found character creation to be one of the most fun parts of the game. I personally find it to be one of the most fun parts of the game.
Mhm.
Um, and what I will say is that because of this catalog of components, um, it does require time that you need to spend browsing that catalog. So that makes it a little bit trickier if you want to do character creation as a session together as a group. You can absolutely do that, but if you haven't looked at the catalog before, it's just going to take a little extra time while everybody, browses through and looks.
Hmm. And I'm guessing I'm guessing to ease that issue, you plan on doing a bunch of resources on your website.
So I have in addition to the character builder app, I have a separate component browser that just makes it very fast and easy to search and filter the different components. So you can filter by category of component, which is like power or utility or body or things like that. And you can also just search arbitrary phrases. Um, and you can filter by like number of points. So, for instance, if you only have 2 points left in your buy, you can use the component browser to filter to components that are 2 points or less, and makes it easier to find what you're looking for.
Mhm. Now, when it comes to skills, uh, that earlier point allotment that you mentioned, is that also what you're going to be spending your starting spread on skills with?
Good question. So the skills or patterns are segmented and have their own initial numbers of points. So there's three main categories of patterns, and for instance, the core category, you start with 4 points to distribute, um, and the other categories have their own numbers of starting points. So that is a little bit more similar to White Wolf in that case.
Hmm. I can certainly get that. Now, now when it comes to combat, when it comes to conflict, are you handling it in a wound based approach? Or are you handling it with a HP based approach? How are you handling combat?
Yeah. So in Sentience, your player character has four different hardware modules, which is your head, chassis, arms, and legs. And all of the components that you buy pertain to one of those modules. And each module has its own damage tracker. And the damage levels go from 0 to 5, 5 being completely destroyed. So that makes combat and other kinds of conflict, physical conflict in the game, very dangerous because you could, potentially lose your arms permanently in one really bad dice roll, or maybe two. Um, and so that, incentivizes players to think hard about if they want to get into a physical altercation. um, that said, there's been plenty of combat in the playtests, and it's been pretty fun.
Hmm. Now, continuing on from that, with one of the other things I was a bit curious about, especially looking at some of the example setups, has to do with it appears there's a relationship between certain parts and components in that same unified pool.
Sorry, I don't quite get your question.
Um, would it be correct of me to assume that components is point based, or is it monetary based?
It's point based, so every component has a point cost, usually between 1 and 3 or 4, although some of them go up to 8 and 10, which are, extreme investments. Um, and the point value for a component also counts as the monetary cost later in the game. So in the game, you have resources, which is a little bit like coin in Blades in the Dark. It's an abstracted,
Or resources in World of Darkness?
yeah. So those resources can be used to directly buy components using their point cost. And that was something that I came up with about halfway through. Originally, I was using archipelago dollars, which is the currency in the setting. Um, and each component had both a point value and a dollar value, but I discovered that it was way cleaner and easier to just have that one single point value used for everything.
Hmm. Now, looking over the character sheet, there's a few aspects that I am a bit curious about. One of them is charge and glitches.
Mm-hmm.
What would that entail, and where would that get its use?
Yeah. So charge represents your current electrical charge or battery level, really. The default max charge is 10. You can buy components that increase that maximum charge, battery packs, and so forth. And there's also a discharge rate, which the default is 5. And the discharge rate represents how much charge you use in 24 hours just from being alive, so to speak, just from operating. So this means that every 24 hours, you're going to lose a certain amount of charge. And, that requires you to consider how you're going to recharge. In some scenarios, recharging might be easy if you're in an urban environment and there's lots of opportunities to charge. But if you're out in the middle of nowhere, you're going to have to think really carefully about where you're going to get your next charge from. And then glitches are a system where various phenomena will potentially incur a glitch, which is a set of two tables that you roll on. And they could be things like your motor functions freeze, and you're effectively paralyzed, or it could be that your sensory functions start to hallucinate or become noisy, and you're going to have to take that into account. And then there's certain processes that will reduce glitches or remove them.
Hmm. I can certainly get that. Now, in continuing on from that, there's the concept of ingress. What would that entail?
Are you thinking of imprints?
No, ingress, like ingress as far as ingress protection.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ingress protection. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So ingress protection is the same as it's defined in the real world today, which is two numbers that determine how protected something is from water. Uh, well, technically water and dust. So an ingress protection rating of 66, which is the default, means that a small amount of water that gets sprayed on you won't affect you, but like total immersion in water would. Um, and you can spend points on different components that can improve that ingress protection rating. So, for example, there's a sleeve called sealskin that makes you completely watertight and able to swim underwater.
Hmm. Now, since you brought up imprints, let's say a good spot as any to cover that.
Yeah.
So,
So, oh, go ahead.
so with it, is it a case of compulsions, or is it something else?
Yeah, imprints are essentially a phrase that you have to obey should the situation arise. And if you want to disobey it, you have to make a roll. For example, you could have an imprint that states "obey your owner."
Hmm.
So you could be like a janitor android that works at a school, and your owner is the superintendent of the building, for instance. And if you have that imprint that says obey your owner and say it has a level of 3, if the superintendent tells you go mop that floor, you have to do it. And if you want to try to resist that, you make something called a control check. And the difficulty then is the level of the imprint, which in this scenario is 3, which is about an average difficulty. And that's really it. And the interesting and tricky thing about imprints is that they can be very interpretational. And ultimately, the game master may be called upon to make a judgment call about if an imprint applies in a situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. But with with that in mind, uh, since there's a lot of avenues that character creation can go, I even though even though analysis paralysis isn't really going to be as much of a thing as you had said, do you have plans in the full book to introduce some sample archetypes to get people hitting the ground running the first time?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the book will include some pre-gens, which you can just use as is, or you can customize them, use them as starting points. And I may also include some templates that are kind of like halfway there. Um, so they might have some components picked out, but it leaves a little bit of room for customization. That might be an interesting option.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly see that. For me, it's a case of making sure that if you're doing freeform, you're giving people a bone, as in the whole throwing a bone to them.
Yeah,
Because otherwise, you can have situations where it's like you're pushing them off of the edge into the pool in the deep end and just telling them swim. Damn it.
yeah, absolutely. And the free quick start guide, PDF quick start guide, which is scheduled to come out by the end of the campaign. Um, and incidentally, every backer will get the PDF quick start guide for free, as well as anyone on the email list.
Mm-hmm.
And so the quick start guide will include some pre-gens and a pre-written scenario that you can dive right into.
Yeah, I was going to ask about advancement, but it looks like you're doing a spending XP approach with everything based around levels.
Yeah, there's two main ways of improving your character. One is buying new hardware components, which we've kind of covered, and the other is spending. Well, let me be a little bit more specific. The way that XP works is that patterns, which again are learned skills, every time you fail a check that utilizes one of those patterns, you tick an XP box next to that pattern. And depending on your current level of the pattern, it costs such and such number of XP to go up to the next level. So if you have one level in awareness in the awareness pattern, it costs 5 XP to go up to 2. And then it costs 10 XP to go from 2 to 3 and so on. And so you get, like I said, you get XP from failing checks, so you learn from your mistakes, so to speak. But you also get session XP at the end of every session. And there are things like if you had to make a control check, which refers to like seeing if you can control your emotional state, you get 2 XP from that. You get 2 XP from pushing a roll. So there's certain incentivizations there.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, what are you shooting for as far as a page count for the full book?
Yeah. The ultimate page count is yet to be determined, both because I'm waiting to see if I can commission more writing, from the Kickstarter funds, and also because the layout is going to impact the actual physical page count. I'm anticipating between 200 to 300 pages, and it's going to be a 6-inch by 9-inch hardcover book.
Mm-hmm. I could see that. And as far as the release window, what would you be shooting for that?
So the final shipment is going to be the middle of next year. I deliberately gave myself a lot of extra time, both for the actual manufacture and shipping of the book, which, depending on where it's manufactured, can take months. And that's before shipping them to the final customer. But I also gave myself intentionally a lot of room for more content and more art. And again, that partly depends on what the final Kickstarter funding is at.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly get that, but I will for sure be looking forward to seeing how it develops. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple and enjoy the madness that happens around here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
Well, thank you again.
And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody!